Hi, so if you're back, we're up to section 3 of my thesis paper entitled The Eternal Sunshine of the Godless Mind, which is a journey into spiritual atheism that I wrote for my master's in spirituality at Merrimack College. As always, if you have questions or comments, I would love to hear them in the comment section below. I personally found the topic very interesting, and I hope you do too. So here we go. This next section is entitled When God Language is Non-Essential. And here we go. So I would like to begin this section with a disclaimer. My intent is not to show master's level research or to report on any in-depth interpretational stances. Prior to my classes at Merrimack College, I had never heard of these people. My inclusion of them in my thesis on spiritual atheism is based on my experiential exposure to them. I would consider myself an outlier in this program, and what I expected in these classes, I honestly did not think through. I knew it was more education on a spiritual topic, and that was enough to pique my interest. What I would like to convey is how a spiritual atheist sits with all of this. In my engagement with the Pseudo-Dionysius, Ignatius of Loyola, and Meister Eckert, I am aware that I am reading from a position outside of belief. My exposure to these thinkers came not through devotion, but through classes. And what I encountered in their writings was not a confirmation of God, but a recognition of something else, something deeply human. And again, I found that if the word God was set aside, the experience itself did not disappear. So what remains are the descriptions of interior depth, moments where language falls short, where the self becomes less fixed, where meaning, beauty, and clarity seem to arise from somewhere just beyond ordinary awareness. Where these thinkers attribute such experiences to the divine, I understand them as expressions of a human capacity. For reflection, for perception, for encounters with our own consciousness that feel at times larger than the self that contains them. I am not denying the reality of what they describe. Rather, I'm declining the explanation that they give for it. I say we are capable of great things. Some say we are capable of great things because of God. To address the term non-duality, since it will be used multiple times after this, my paper will hold that dualism is the separation. It's two different things. That non-dualism in simple terms would be a rejection of separation, and that separation itself is not real. There are many versions of what non-duality means, and I attest that non-duality does not require a theological anchoring or a belief in God, but rather the embrace of depth, awareness, meaning, and moral intelligence within. Pseudo-Dionysius. By an undivided and absolute abandonment of yourself and everything, shedding all and freed from all, you will be uplifted to the ray of divine shadow which is above everything that is. That's from the Mystical Theology by Pseudo-Dionysius in the late 5th century. How glorious! Okay, religiously nebulous, but figuratively expansive, this quote brings a sense of awe to me, a breathless realization of self and infinite space. All things long for it. It's purposely vague. The meaning of it is in the eye of the beholder. What is it that you are looking for? How are you looking for it? Some materialists might say there is no it, but as a spiritual atheist, I say it is the perfect word. The definition, the concept of it, so inherently particular to the person that one has to question, does the definition even matter? Or is it just the experience? Apophatic theology defines God by negation, stripping away human concepts and limitation, as God is beyond all language and understanding. And in my opinion, that's valid. This is a valid way to view God, whether belief is held or not. My observations have led me to view the act of attributing human qualities to the concept of God to be fundamentally flawed. We anthropomorphize other things to make them more human. Our dogs, our car. God shouldn't be something that gets brought to a human level. It should be the reverse. Meister Eckert was a 13th to 14th century Dominican mystic who said things that sounded shockingly close to non-theism at times. He emphasized that the birth of God in the soul, the idea that God is found in the ground of being, not as an external ruler, radical interiority, and the detachment from images and concepts of God. He walked a fine line at that time, and some of his thoughts were deemed as heretical by Pope John the 22nd shortly after Eckart's death. Eckert is a wonderful example of language that transcends dogma. It's less about religious doctrine and more about the human experience and our responsibility to our own growth and development. In Carl McColman's book, Christian Mystics, he points out the non-dualistic thinking of Eckert in his Sermon 16. The eye with which I see God is exactly the same eye with which God sees me. My eye and God's eye are one eye, one seeing, one knowledge, and one love. How does this appeal to the spiritual atheist? Well, because in my thinking, Eckert says that God is within you and you are God. I will use the voice we hear in our heads as an example. Is that voice we hear in our thoughts God? Is that voice we are dialoguing with God? I have said that I don't believe in an external authority, nor would I personally believe that the external authority is within us. But I would say that we are the source of our thoughts, our behaviors, our consciousness is within us. Eckert calls this God. I'm calling it self. In other words, my own higher power. The supercomputer of our mind, that store of all our memories, influences, emotions, experience, that's what talks back to us. How we take care of and nurture that supercomputer is how we receive answers. Feed it negativity, and that is what will be reflected. Feed it positivity and growth, and that will be reflected. If you believe in God, and that God is within all of us, then God also is in believers of other faiths, and in non-believers. If God is omnipotent, then God does not need my belief to exist in all things, myself included. Mysticism says God is within you. Non-dualistic mysticism can say you are God. Spiritual atheism just says there is no God, just the self. Saint Ignatius. So many religions are grounded in revelations. That's God speaking to a person. But the perceived meaning changes drastically with a small shift in language. Proclaiming God spoke to me in a dream is very different than saying, I dreamt God spoke to me. The first implies this divine mandate, a kind of psychic dictation from above, while the second is simply sharing a personal experience. I can respect your vision. However, that does not oblige me to follow your faith. Saint Ignatius had a dream, yes, but he also had a plan. And he developed a method, a structure for spiritual discernment, the spiritual exercises. Do people consider Saint Ignatius iconic because of his mystical vision? Or is his legacy rooted in the disciplined, practical methodology he left behind? Regarding St. Ignatius's exercises and Ignatian spirituality as an inspiration for a pedagogical theory of accompaniment, Merrick and Walulik write, In the social sciences, spirituality is gaining increasing prominence. Once considered primarily in religious terms, spirituality is now understood in relation to areas like self-awareness, wisdom, morality, creativity, feelings, and worldview. These dimensions hold personal and social significance, particularly in relation to health. While spirituality was originally tied to religion, it is now often described as existing outside institutional faith, or even as an alternative to it. Sometimes equated with new religious movements, it is more broadly recognized as an inward experience of the sacred, personal, intimate, and connected with the human spirit. Spiritual exercises, in this view, awaken an inner vitality that manifests what Mariansky calls the creative forces of the spirit. Just spirituality, the inner self, no God required. So the spiritual exercises are a structured set of mental and reflective practices designed to train a person to examine their inner experiences, clarify their values, and align their actions with what they perceive as their deepest sense of meaning, which Ignatius frames as God. This is all done with the aid of a spiritual director. This felt like a connection to the Stoic philosophers, particularly with the concept of the examen. In Like the Lightning by David Fleming, he writes that the examen of meditation is when Ignatius suggests that the participant take the time to reflect upon their prayer exercise, to acknowledge what went well and on where they felt lacking, and to give their thanks to God. The Stoics also believed in a daily examination, sometimes called an evening review, for realignment with reason, nature, or inner life. And one can do this without any reference to God. So this section was really not to start anything new about any of these people, because I am not a scholar of Pseudo-Dionysius or St. Ignatius or any of that. But it was the fact that their readings were assigned. So how do I, as somebody who has lived life, I don't have any faith, I read these people who are deeply steeped in their religious beliefs, right? And yet I still got a lot out of reading about them, and I still found the path that said all these beautiful things without having to believe in God. It still meant something to me. The experience was still there. It was still beautiful. And I found that I was doing that through many of the readings that we had, where I would take it and put it through kind of an atheistic lens and kind of filter the stuff that did not apply to me, but keep the human parts that did apply to me. For the length of the paper, I probably could have gone on more about Pseudo-Dionysius and Meister Eckert and all of them, but at some point we had to think about the length of the paper. But yeah, I did find them very enjoyable to read about. I actually have read more books on these people and the beliefs and the thoughts and the ideas, and it was well worth my time. So leave your questions.